He thought it was just a scan, a standard checkup for a minor injury, nothing more. But when the alien surgeon fell silent and the machines stopped humming, it wasn't because something was broken. It was because they found something no one could explain, something every human has and no one else does. Derek Callahan had never liked medical bays on alien ships. Not because they were alien, that part was fine, but because they were too sterile. Not in the hygienic sense, though they certainly nailed that. No, it was the atmosphere. No humming machines, no soft murmur of staff gossiping about break room drama, just an unbroken, unsettling silence. The kind that made you feel like an intruder in your own scan. He shifted slightly on the exam table, wincing as the cold plastic sheet crinkled under him. His shoulders still hurt from a bad landing during yesterday's atmospheric survey on Kepler 3Z. One wrong step on loose gravel, and he'd ended up with a level 2 joint sprain. Not too serious, but rules were rules. Any injury during off-world duty required a full body scan to check for hidden damage before returning to work. "Remain still," chirped the lead surgeon, a thin Tharoon named Vitalik. His 12 fingers moved quickly over the console as his eyes scanned several holographic screens. Internal mapping at 97% dot. Starting contrast resonance scan now. Derek sighed and stared up at the ceiling. The room was dim, glowing faintly violet from the Tharoon's ultraviolet lighting. And in turn moved quietly along the walls, holding a notepad, watching Derek like he might suddenly turn into something interesting. Everything seemed normal. Until Vitalik froze. Not just paused, he stopped completely. Even the background drones stopped buzzing, like they sensed the sudden tension filling the room. "Subject displays anomalous tissue cluster," Vitalik said slowly. "Mass is 9.2 centimeters in length. Location inferior to the ileocecal junction, anterior to the iliac vessels, uncalcified, no arterial redundancy, no osseous shielding, unprotected and unutilized." The intern tilted its head in alarm. "No vascular invasion, static cell division rate. It is not cancerous." Derek blinked. "Wait, are you talking about the appendix?" Both Tharoon turned to him simultaneously. "The what?" Vitalik's voice was low. "The appendix," Derek said again, sitting up slightly despite a warning beep from the console. "Ya know, the weird little tail on your large intestine? Humans have one. It's totally normal." The pause this time was longer. Vitalik summoned a holographic projection of the scan, enlarging the appendix like a crime scene photo. "There is nothing biologically normal about this." Derek squinted at the glowing image. "That's just the appendix. Seriously, some people get it removed if it gets inflamed, others live with it their whole lives." "And its function?" the intern asked. The alien's voice trembled. "Well, nobody's exactly sure. Some say it helped digest plants 1,000,000 years ago. Others think it's just leftover biology. I mean, it doesn't really do anything anymore." Vitalik recoiled. "You possess a dormant organ with no active metabolic contribution, situated in a region vulnerable to blunt trauma. And you keep it?" Derek shrugged. "Yeah, unless it acts up." "Acts up?" Vitalik whispered. "Appendicitis, inflammation. Hurts like hell, you get a fever, nausea. If it ruptures, it leaks infected stuff into your abdomen. Can be fatal if untreated, but we just remove it. Pretty standard surgery back home." Vitalik turned a sickly shade of blue-green. "You are describing a volatile internal structure with spontaneous necrotic potential, and this is typical?" Derek blinked. "Yeah, it's not great, but it's not unusual. Like 10% of people get appendicitis at some point. We just deal with it." Silence. Then Vitalik motioned sharply. The medbay doors snapped open. "Secure the patient," Vitalik ordered. "I am halting the scan. We require a xenobiological specialist immediately." Derek froze. Hey, whoa, hang on. This isn't a quarantine case. "I'm not contagious. I told you this is standard anatomy." But it was too late. Two attendants floated in, scanning him from every angle, their instruments clicking in rapid succession. The intern's eyes were wide. He's carrying a biological bomb inside him, and he didn't know? Derek groaned and lay back. Oh no, here we go. 20 minutes later, he sat under a containment field in Observation Base 7, sipping tepid electrolyte solution and trying to explain human biology to Dr. Iltanir, the ship's xenobiology lead. Iltanir had spent the last decade cataloging planetary flora from systems without a single mammalian species. He was not prepared for humans. So let me get this straight, Iltanir said slowly, mandibles twitching in confusion. Derek held up a hand. Stop, don't say mandibles. I hate when people do that. The alien blinked. Apologies. So you have an internal growth that can spontaneously rupture, releasing infectious material, and your civilization has not eradicated it from your gene pool? Evolution doesn't work on command, Derek said. It takes thousands of years. Some organs stick around longer than they're useful. Then why not remove them preemptively? Because most of the time it's harmless. Removing it carries its own risks, surgery, anesthesia complications. It's a trade-off. Dr. Iltanir stared at him in disbelief. You've normalized carrying dormant death mechanisms inside your abdomen? Derek shrugged again. We're really good at emergency medicine. Do all humans have these? Iltanir asked, now visibly alarmed. Most. Yeah, some get it out early if there's family history of issues, but usually we just wait. Wait for what? For it to maybe explode. The room went very still. You live like this? Iltanir said softly, carrying a time bomb, hoping it doesn't detonate. Derek smiled weakly. You'd be amazed what we get used to. Dr. Iltanir slowly turned off his datapad. We need a symposium, immediately. Really? Derek asked. For the appendix? For the implications, Iltanir said. Because if your species treats this as routine, what else have you adapted to survive? Derek didn't have an answer, but judging from the panicked flurry now overtaking the medbay, it was clear the aliens were starting to ask that same question. And they didn't like where it led. The symposium convened 2 hours later in a sealed medical auditorium aboard the Zaroon Prime, a vessel so advanced its automated surgical suite could recook nerves on a cellular level. Yet now, that same facility sat in stunned silence as 36 of the galaxy's foremost xenomedical minds stared at a projection of Derek's midsection. They weren't marveling at the tendons or admiring cardiovascular integrity. No, they were transfixed by the appendix, a grainy, bloated gray lump floating beside glowing scans of gallbladders, kidneys, and intestines. It might as well have been a parasite. Derek sat off to the side, flanked by 2 guards whose job seemed unclear, even to them. He sipped a second pouch of electrolyte fluid, trying not to scratch at the itchy medwrap on his shoulder. Let us address the obvious, began a Drelshan surgeon named Kampara. Her voice was calm, but her crest feathers kept rippling in alarm. How has a species achieved interstellar travel while tolerating vestigial organs prone to spontaneous infection? Dr. Iltanir cleared his throat. Human adaptability appears to operate not through anatomical perfection, but through strategic tolerance of failure. Kompara's feathers flared. That is not a survival strategy. That is reckless biological gambling. Derek raised a hand. It's not that reckless. We figured out how to treat appendicitis in like the 1800s. Antibiotics, surgery, it's manageable. Sornic pathologist leaned forward. You expect us to believe your civilization endured millennia of abdominal inflammation before implementing a solution? Derek thought about it. I guess we just had other problems. The room erupted in overlapping speech, many of which included the word catastrophic in wildly different dialects. Dr. Iltanir cut through it all. The real issue is not this single organ. It is what it represents. Humans are not optimized. They are iterative. That silenced the crowd again. You accumulate tolerable failures, he continued. You absorb stress, adapt around flaws, Develop cultural practices instead of genetic corrections. Your immune systems are erratic, your joints prone to wear, your spines structurally questionable. Hey, Derek said. About you survive, Eildenir said, gesturing toward him, by brute force, medical ingenuity, and frankly, disturbing thresholds for pain and risk. What else have you simply put up with? Well, Derek said carefully, there's lower back pain, pretty common. Way beneath the ice? Asked a voice near the back. Something about walking upright in desk jobs. Discs get compressed. It's a thing. What do you do? Stretch, sometimes surgery, usually just tough it out. A hush. A tall Luendic neurologist tapped his pad. And the knees? Ooh, those suck too, Derek admitted, especially after age 40. Vitalik groaned quietly. Kampara turned toward the main council. This is not a biological system. This is organized chaos. But functional, Iltanir said. The question is, how? And that was the new focus. Not what the appendix was, but how humans could carry such vulnerabilities without collapsing under them. The symposium stretched into its fourth hour. Derek was eventually moved to a reclining diagnostic chair to avoid shoulder strain. Meanwhile, a panel began reanalyzing human MRIs with a new lens, not to identify damage, but to locate other ticking time bombs. By the sixth hour, the spleen was under fire. This organ filters blood and has immune functions, said a gray-skinned Atari biochemist. Yet it can rupture from blunt trauma? Yes, Derek said. It's rare, but it happens, usually car accidents. We remove it if necessary. Kampara inhaled sharply. You can survive without a spleen? Well, you need vaccinations afterward, makes you more prone to infections, but yeah, you can live. Iltanir made a quiet, disbelieving sound. A new projection blinked on. Human cranial scans. Several attendees shifted uncomfortably. Skull has thin temporal plates, muttered a Garonian trauma specialist. Zero natural reinforcement around the parietal lobe. You rely entirely on external protection? Helmets, Derek offered helpfully. Unacceptable, muttered Kampara. As the 10th hour approached, Derek's eyes drooped. He didn't notice when they wheeled out the anesthetic histology projectors, or when a second symposium team started debating gallstones. But he jolted awake when someone said wisdom teeth. Nope, he said, sitting upright. That's where I draw the line. They turned to him, confused. You don't want to know, just trust me. It's bad design, it hurts. We pull them out. Your mouths are too small for your own teeth? Kampara asked, aghast. Blame evolution, Derek muttered. Iltanir was now writing furiously. It is not that human biology is failing. It is that it never stops adjusting, regardless of pain. That's not resilience, Kampara snapped. That's chronic dysfunction dressed up as perseverance. Yeah, well, Derek said, rotating his sore shoulder slowly. Sometimes, that's how we win. At 3 a.m. ship time, the council recessed. Derek was moved back to medbay, groggy but amused. The guards were dismissed. Vetralik stayed behind, studying Derek's chart. Does it still hurt? Vitalik asked, tapping the shoulder. Only when I move it a certain way, Derek admitted. Grade 2 sprain should be a few weeks. Vitalik nodded. Humans survive by suffering gradually, don't they? Derek gave a tired grin. You make it sound noble. Sometimes we just don't have a choice. The lights dimmed. In the quiet that followed, Vitalik added, We thought endurance came from perfection. Perhaps it comes from refusal instead. Derek drifted to sleep with that strange, unsettling comfort. His appendix remained untouched, nestled quietly between scans and conversations, the symbol of 1,000 questions the galaxy had only just begun to ask. By the next day, word had spread. Derek couldn't walk more than 20 feet without being accosted by an alien technician or a junior medic with glowing eyes and endless questions. They didn't want autographs or diplomatic insight. They wanted descriptions of gallbladder attacks, chronic migraines, impacted molars, hernias. the darker corners of human anatomy that evolution had seemingly abandoned like unfinished drafts. He sat quietly in the hydrostatic recovery lounge, arm still immobilized in a sling while his shoulder ligaments began the slow, methodical healing process. Vetelik had insisted on keeping it braced properly, noting that, unlike Thararun, humans lacked subdermal lattice support. Too easy to re-injure without noticing, he'd said, and Derek hadn't argued. The swelling had only started to go down that morning, still weeks before full function. A Drolic intern slid onto the bench beside him, antennae twitching. "Is it true your eyes degrade with age?" Derek, sipping from a protein pack, nodded. "Usually after 40 or 50, some earlier." The intern leaned forward in horror. "And you don't regenerate them?" "Nope. Glasses, contacts, laser correction sometimes. But yeah, we just lose sharpness gradually." The Drosic made a sound like a bubble popping. "Voluntary sensory deterioration. Remarkable." Derek looked around. The lounge had turned into a low-grade interrogation zone. A cluster of observers murmured by the entrance. Someone was sketching what looked like a schematic of the human spine. Another pointed to a diagram of foot arches. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you guys building a database?" The intern didn't look up. "A global survey of functional biological instability. Your systems appear intentionally haphazard." "You're not intentionally anything," Derek muttered. "We didn't design ourselves." "About your function," the intern insisted. "And you don't treat failure as the end, you normalize it." He didn't respond to that. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was uncomfortably accurate. By late afternoon, Dr. Iltanir summoned him again, this time to the genetics lab, where an enormous schematic of human evolutionary branches floated in the air like a chaotic root system. A Corvallian neuroanatomist was currently presenting on peripheral nerve regeneration, or lack thereof. "Humans cannot regrow nerve fibers past limited thresholds," she said, eyes scanning her notes. "But rather than compensating through enhanced redundancy, they employ external prosthetics and, in some cases, occupational therapy to retrain undamaged systems." Derek glanced at Iltanir. "I get the feeling you're not just cataloging weird organs anymore. We're trying to understand," Iltanir said gently, "why your species keeps surviving despite everything biology throws at you. Maybe we're just too stubborn to stop." "Or," the Corvallian interjected, "your culture has overcompensated with technology and medicine." Derek laughed. "Oh, definitely. We patch everything. Sometimes I think duct tape should be part of our DNA." The room paused. "I'm joking," he added. "Are you?" someone whispered. For the next several hours, they focused on human metabolic disorders. Diabetes, thyroid issues, adrenal insufficiencies, and how treatment had created a feedback loop where genetic issues no longer eliminated themselves over generations. Medicine had changed evolution's rules. Weak traits weren't phased out. They were managed. "You create solutions before nature can correct the problem," said Kumpara. "That's not adaptation. That's intervention." "And it works," Derek said. "Until it doesn't," she replied. A panel on surgical history followed. Derek found himself retelling the first known appendectomy, 1735, a London surgeon named Claudius Amion, and explaining how modern laparoscopic tools reduced post-op infection risks. At one point, Batalik pulled up a new scan, this time from an older human patient. The appendix was gone. The surgical scar was noted. No complications. The alien attendees stared at it like a deleted error message. "You do remove them sometimes," Kumpara said. "Yeah," Derek said. "If it starts to go bad, we get it out. Better safe than sorry." "Reactive surgery," Kumpara muttered. "You wait for failure, then respond." Derek felt the tension behind that phrasing, but didn't rise to it. Later that evening, while resting in his cabin, Derek received a quiet alert. A request to join a private debrief with the ship's command team. Not military, medical command. Curious and a little wary, he agreed. The chamber was small, climate-stabilized, and lined with biological archives. 3 senior officers stood waiting. Vetalik, Iltanir, and the ship's chief anatomist, a Siltari named Tharn. Tharn gestured toward the center. "We need to ask you something that won't leave this room." Derek sat down slowly. "Okay. Are there other organs like the appendix?" Tharn asked. "Ones that serve no useful purpose and might rupture or malfunction catastrophically without warning?" Derek nodded slowly. "Sure. The gallbladder can get clogged, tonsils can get infected, wisdom teeth can impact. Some people have Meckel's diverticulum, a leftover embryonic duct. That can rupture too. And all of this is considered normal? Well, not ideal, but yeah. It's not rare. We've learned to live with it." The 3 aliens exchanged glances. Then Tharn leaned in. "We thought your species' strength came from its anatomy," he said, "but it comes from your refusal to surrender to it." Derek frowned. "That's not exactly how we see it. It's how we do," Vitalik said quietly. "You survive by endurance, but not physical, philosophical. Your bodies break, but your will persists." They were silent for a while. Then Iltanir added, "It makes us question everything. What if perfection isn't the goal? What if persistence is?" Derek exhaled. "You're giving a lot of credit to an organ we usually forget exists." "It was never about the appendix," Tharn said. "It was about what it revealed." Derek left the room an hour later, tired, his shoulders sore again despite the anti-inflammatories. But something had changed. The medical team wasn't just curious anymore. They were rattled. Not because human bodies were fragile, but because they weren't supposed to survive. And yet, they did. The quiet hum of the Zaroon Prime's medical deck felt different now. Less sterile, more reverent, like the place had absorbed the weight of its revelations. Derek noticed it the moment he stepped out of his cabin the next morning, still gingerly cradling his left arm in the immobilizer. The soreness had worsened overnight, but he was managing. He had another 3 weeks, maybe 4, before he'd be cleared for full use, and only if he stuck to rehab protocols, no shortcuts. He was heading to physical therapy when he found the hallway lined with soft glowing screens. Not propaganda, not warnings, educational modules. Human physiology, biology, and, most oddly, psychology. One display explained emotional stress responses in adolescence, another neuroplasticity in stroke recovery. A third showed a detailed animation of a knee replacement. "Public access?" he asked as a familiar figure fell in beside him. Vitalik nodded. "We voted last night to incorporate human biological tolerances into the interspecies medical curriculum." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Tolerances? We don't have a better word for it. You endure injuries that would debilitate other species, sometimes for years. We need to know how, for emergencies, for war zones, for deep space." Derek slowed his steps. "You're not trying to copy us, are you?" "No," Vitalik said, "but we must account for the fact that you exist and continue to function despite your anatomical flaws. You're a statistical outlier we can't ignore anymore." They entered the rehab wing. Derek was guided to a therapy table where a machine began a gentle, passive rotation of his arm, stretching the shoulder joint incrementally to maintain range of motion. It hurt. He winced. "Pain?" asked the technician. "Yeah," Derek said, "not bad, but enough." The tech adjusted the speed. Vitalik watched carefully. "You tolerate pain unusually well," he said after a while. "Your nociceptors don't behave differently, but your behavior does." Derek gave a weak chuckle. "Pain's part of life. You don't really get to opt out of it. We would call that a defect, and we'd call pretending you can avoid it unrealistic." Vitalik considered that. "There's something else," he said. "We reviewed your injury history." Derek winced again, this time more from embarrassment than shoulder movement. "I didn't know that was public." "It's not. But your participation in this medical exchange authorized limited access. You've had 4 broken bones, 2 surgeries, 1 childhood concussion, multiple untreated strains, a dental root canal, and an incident involving frostbite. And yet you rank in the top percentile of your unit for field performance. Derek sighed. I never said I was in perfect shape. That's precisely the point, Vitalik said. None of you are, and yet you continue. He watched Derek grit his teeth through another joint rotation. The tendon felt like it was trying to light itself on fire. You suffer, Vitalik said softly, and instead of collapsing, you adjust. Instead of stopping, you adapt, even when it makes no biological sense. Derek gave a dry smile. Adaptation isn't supposed to be elegant, it's just supposed to work. Later that evening, Derek was invited to address a small panel of trainee medics, a dozen species, all seated in a wide crescent, data pads in hand. They asked questions with a mixture of awe and anxiety. What's the threshold for appendectomy intervention? Do you have internal safeguards against chronic inflammation? How do you psychologically cope with organs that might kill you unpredictably? He answered carefully, honestly. He explained how diagnosis required clinical exams, pain in the lower right quadrant, elevated white cell counts, imaging if needed. He described laparoscopic techniques, post-op recovery times, typically a few days in hospital, with 2 to 4 weeks until full return to activity. He warned them that not every case presented classically. He didn't sugarcoat the pain, or the fear, or the reality of waking up knowing something inside you had to be removed and how easily it could have gone wrong if it hadn't been caught in time. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then a young Varan student raised a hand. If your species can survive with internal failures, she asked, does that make you stronger or just more desperate? Derek took his time before answering. I don't think it's about strength, he said, or desperation. I think it's about choosing to keep going even when your body gives you reasons not to. We've learned how to work around what breaks. And that's not because we're fearless. It's because we're afraid and we still move forward. Vitalik, who'd been watching from the side, nodded slightly. The panel dispersed after that. Derek stayed back, watching the stars shift past the viewing window as the Zaroon Prime arced around a pale moon. His arm ached. His muscles tensed every time the brace reminded him not to lift too fast. Recovery would be long. Incomplete, maybe. But it would happen, because it had to. Before he turned in, Iltanir approached one last time. No datapad, no files, just a single question. Will it ever stop, he asked, the injuries, the malfunctions? Derek smiled faintly. No, not really. And you accept that? Not always. But we deal with it. Iltanir looked thoughtful. I once believed perfection was the pinnacle of evolution. Now I wonder if it's simply survivability. Derek turned to him. Sometimes survival is the pinnacle. When he returned to his